who were in the Niger State bus transport service have been freed, but it is already day 6 of the abduction of the pupils at Government Science College in Kagara. Tell us, in terms of what is obviously now a hostage situation, how critical is time, either for negotiation or for some other action that could result in the freedom of the abductees?
Thank you. Good morning, all. In any delicate situation involving lives, especially where the actors are known to be dangerous, are known to not hesitate to use force, and unfortunately, in this instance, they have displayed that. They killed one student, and the nature of that killing is what bothers me. They used 3 bullets. They shot at an unarmed young man with 3 bullets, 1 to his head. And that tells me that, unfortunately, they will not hesitate to use force. So it's a very delicate situation. There are experts who are trained to handle such situations. Normally, once the days go by like that, you'd want to request for proof of life. We're dealing with 40 persons, so you want to at least confirm that they are all alive, and God forbid, where you are not sure, at least that the majority of them are all alive. And then in certain instances, you want to request for a concession from the adversary, so that would demonstrate to you the willingness of that adversary to let go of certain items. Now, the good news is, based on feelers I have gotten from some of the intermediaries on the government side, is that they know where these persons are in terms of the geographic location of the abductees. It also appeared, based on the feelers coming out, that the level of discussion has reached an advanced stage. And so they were very hopeful. Beyond the delicate nature of the situation, it means they are making progress. 2 things that worry me is the absence of confidentiality in the manner that the whole thing is going on. In any security operation, confidentiality is absolutely important. Unfortunately, we've had some of the key actors coming out to make statements, and that unfortunately can compromise the outcome. So I would advise that in handling such delicate matters, that confidentiality is observed absolutely. It is after you achieve your objective, then you can release the kind of statements you want to release. Secondly, it's absolutely important that we maintain a balance between the kinetic and non-kinetic components. And based on the feelers, the unfortunate incident that happened yesterday in Abuja, it appears that is what we're doing. You always want to negotiate on the basis of strength, because that also helps your position. And so I would advise strongly that we continue along this line, hoping that at the end of the day, these 40 persons will be released.
All right, thank you. Let's return to Kagara once again, where we still have our correspondent, Abdullahi Mohammed. Abdullahi, you actually didn't tell us more about the Kagara student. We heard that there was an interface between the abductors and Sheikh Gumi, and the resultant effect of that is that the boys are being expected. In fact, it was said that yesterday, being Sunday, they were expected to return. Tell us more about this. And again, what other efforts are being made by the state governments to ensure the release of these students and other adoptees?
Well, what I would like to share with you at this moment is the fact that the release of those passengers has brought a kind of hope and also confidence among people here who we have seen in clusters discussing about in fact appreciating the effort of the state government that with the coming out of the release of these passengers, an indication that they will soon also see the release of the boys. And in an interface with some sources that we talked to yesterday, they also told us that they are expecting that that night that some of the boys will be released. They said that they're expecting that the boys will be released in batches, and then through different routes, that they might not come out, in a cluster together. So we kept watch throughout the night. We kept our ears on the ground throughout the night, but we didn't hear anything about the fact that they have been released. But that was exactly what we got as information yesterday. And of course, I will still tell you that the release of those passengers has ignited a kind of hope, especially to families of those boys that are still in the bush, that we have also gone to just visit and then hear from them.
Abdullahi, tell us something. On the heels of the abduction last week, the state government issued a directive for the closure of similar schools in and around that location. Is there any other school in Kagara, whether elementary or secondary? And if so, are the schools open or they are shut?
Right now, schools in this axis, it's been listed up, I think, about 2 or 3 local governments that are on by this zone. All the schools are shut down. They are under lock and key. We've been to schools days back. We have seen that it's still under lock and key. And then even, I think yesterday, we also went around. We were at Government Science Secondary School, Kagara, and some private schools, even in Kagara here. It's all under lock and key. No school is operating here, and that's the directive from the government, and I know as it is being abided by these private schools and also the public schools.
Was it necessarily the case, Abdullahi, that most, or shall we say all of the students at Government Science College Kagara were from Kagara community, or they came from far and wide?
Exactly, I would like to tell you that most of those schoolboys that were taken are not from Kagara town. In fact, the only families that were able to establish the fact that they have their people abducted are first of all a wife of a teacher, and then again a wife of I think one of the principal or vice principal, who has her parent here in Kagara, and her younger ones. She was taken with her children, about 6 children, because they reside there in the school. But we have not met any family here in Kagara town itself that has one of the boys that is taken, except a pastor to the deceased Habila, who lives here in Kagara, and we were told the boy is also even buried here in Kagara, but they are all not from the town Kagara itself. Most of them come from villages around Kagara, and then maybe from some local government areas away from Kagara itself.
All right, thank you, Abdullahi. We may have to return to you in the course of the program, believing that there will be sharing news from Kagara this time around. Thank you indeed. Now let's return to the studio here, where we have our discussant. Now, looking at the scenario, we just heard that there was an interface between the abductors and some persons, from the government angle, and of course the Sheikh Bumi, who has been doing that for a while now. There are promises that are going to be released. Do you think that such promises should be something to, for us to believe in. Because, of course, Gumi said that by Sunday, being yesterday, that it's expected that the boys will be released. But now we have seen that nothing has happened. And again, the abductors who released the passengers perhaps are not the same group that abducted the science students. So what do you make of this? What do you make of this? We are hoping that the students will be released. Meanwhile, passengers were released. Is there any connection, between the two abductors, the two groups that abducted these individuals, or does the Gumi have a kind of link, between these abductors?
As far as I know, Sheikh Gumi is not the only actor interfacing with the abductors. There are several actors. He's just one of them. And frankly, I'm not even sure if he's playing the role of a negotiator, as it were. He may be playing the role of a mediator, but then there would be a negotiator. And that negotiator will be the one that would put on the table the demands of the abductors. And then, of course, he would also discuss with the government what the options are for releasing those boys. Now, having said that, I heard the statement of one of the governors in the Northwest yesterday, indicating clearly that Sheikh Gumi is not perhaps the principal actor in this instance. So to that extent, I think there are a lot of dynamics involved that may have led to the release of the those in the bus, and then that would likely lead to the release of the boys. The second thing that has also come out is that we're dealing with two different actors. The people that abducted those passengers are different from those that abducted the school students. It also appeared that even the location that they held the captives are different, based on what has come out to the public so far. The third element that is also, for me, a bit worrisome is the fact that what we have been discussing for a very long time has also been proven by this development. The fact that we have ungoverned spaces where non-state actors, armed non-state actors, appear to be in control. If they are able to hold this sizable number of people inside Nigerian territory, then it tells us that these are quote and unquote ungoverned spaces, unfortunately, where they are able to use. And so all of these actors together, especially, and this is the one, when I mentioned confidentiality, this is the point I was trying to lay. There are backdoor channels that every intelligence organization in any country is able to exploit in this type of circumstances. Those backdoor channels are not known to us, but they are very effective, because that is where you go to when the chips are down. And frankly, the chips are down now. So yes, Sheikh Gumi is an actor. He's a prominent one at that. And like I mentioned, a governor has also indicated that there are other actors. But then I'm hoping that those backdoor channels that our intelligence agencies rely on in this very delicate period would be play that role where they are corroborating the outcome of all of these other actors at the end of it. Because what you want to achieve is a situation where you don't come out encouraging this type of incidences. And so intelligence operatives will be gathering that kind of information using those backdoor channels, ensuring that all of these key players are acting towards a particular goal, and that whatever is exchanged in demand, because there is no way out of this, something would have to be given. And so when whatever it is that it's given, that it does not encourage further criminality.
I'm just wondering that, Dr. Kabir Adamu, it appears that the point of kidnap is not the point of release. And that point of release appears to be quite some distance from the point of kidnap. And so the issue of the management of the logistics, how, for instance, bandits could come on motorbikes. Those motorbikes don't run on water, they run on fear. and they're able to traverse the so-called forests from Niger to Zamfara to Kaduna. What does that tell us, in terms of perhaps their entrenchment in the so-called ungoverned spaces? If they are so entrenched, is it necessarily the case also that we probably haven't had the last of this kind of incidents?
Unfortunately, no. I would like to sit here and be optimistic, but unfortunately, no. A supply chain has developed for the industry of abduction, kidnap for ransom in Nigeria. And for those of us who study developments in Zamfara, we saw how that supply chain emerged. There are different aspects of that supply chain. You've mentioned foiling of their means of transportation as an example. They are weapons. No matter how good a weapon is, if you don't have the ammunition to serve that weapon, is useless. So a supply chain for that ammunition has also emerged. Food, a supply chain has emerged. Drugs, a supply chain has emerged. Prostitutes, to serve their needs, has also emerged. So there is a sizable intelligence, at play there. But you need to harvest it. And the only way to harvest it is to also embed yourself within that environment. And so that worries me to the extent that these things are out there, and players like us that are not within the public sector are able to harvest this. And I'm praying that those intelligence departments are also looking at all of these supply chains. We've had governors of some of these states speaking about informants. That's just one of the supply chains. And so it is when you are able to put all of this together that you would hopefully begin to get rid of this menace.
Disrupt the supply chain.
And more importantly, identify key players. Because when you identify the key players, that you'll be able to gather evidence for their prosecution. I would always mention this, that the failure of the criminal justice system to punish offenders is what has led us to where we are. And the law enforcement agencies would need to gather evidence so that they will present this evidence to the courts for the prosecution of the key players. And through intelligence, through painstaking investigation, that is where you'll be able to do that.
All right, Dr. Kabiru Adamu. Thank you indeed. Let's go to Minna, the capital of Niger State, where we have correspondent Hamis Turugo. Hamis, I hope you can hear us clearly. A lot has been said in connection with the release of the abducted science students of Kagara in Niger State there. The news we had was that by yesterday, Sunday, that it was everybody hoped that they will be released, but nothing has happened yet. What we now had was the release of those passengers that were abducted a week ago or thereabout. Now, what is on ground at the moment? You are in Minna, the capital of the state, where, of course, is the seat of power in that state. What else can we know about the government's efforts towards the rescuing of the abducted Kagara students?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Kieran. Well, the situation, has been very positive. You know, there have been, yesterday when the NTA abductees were brought, there was a long discussion about the possibility that maybe the Kagara school children will be brought back. But then nothing came. We have stayed here throughout the night waiting and hoping it didn't come. Usually, what is happening mostly here, you find that official information is not coming forth with the information that is needed. And when it does not, you will find that rumors have become a source of knowledge. So people just peddle stories which ultimately never comes to an end. But then, what really happened yesterday, the release of those 53 passengers of NSTA has given a moral strength for the government. You know, there is a relaxation of anxiety. You know, the parents of those children and the families of all those people that have been abducted in Kangara will at least hope that, well, with the release of this staff, we are optimistic, we are hoping that it may be like a chain that ultimately, in the end, we may be reunited with our loved ones. Now, I think that is the moral implication of the release of those 53 NSTA passengers yesterday. But generally, there was this discussion about the possibility that yesterday night, today in the morning, those people that have been abducted in Kagara may come back. As I speak to you, there has not been anything tangible. All but stories are flying. The optimism is high. Is there, everything is there, but ultimately nothing has happened yet.
Hamisu, did you have the opportunity of interacting with the bus passengers who were freed yesterday? And if you did, what did they volunteer in their first day of freedom?
Sir, yesterday when they came, they were shielded, seriously shielded by security personnel who force you out. In fact, we had a babble, exchanges with some of the officials who defiantly stood between us and those passengers that have been brought back. But then, from the perspective, from what we see of them, it has not been an easy 7 days. They have been there for exactly 7 days, and they were brought back yesterday. They look, well, I don't have to any verbal expression to explain their looks, but they did look pleasant.
Well, it was a happy ending, obviously, so that one can assume that all the passengers who were abducted were also freed. All of the passengers, is that correct?
That is correct. That's correct. Very correct.
Now, Hamisu, what else are you hearing in connection with the hopeful release of the Kagara students? Is there anything coming from the government source, apart from the rumors you talked about earlier on?
Obviously, negotiations are still going on. Discussions are on. There is a high optimism. In fact, when the governor was speaking yesterday, his demeanor changed. That air of at least confidence and maybe that, yes, we are making a headway about him. And when he was speaking about the release of those passengers, he was saying that maybe he didn't give timelines, obviously, but there is a strong hint that maybe as early as today, those abducted school children from Kagara may come back. I'm not saying he said so with a mathematical precision, but what I'm saying that he is imputing it, and we have to take his word for that.
All right, Hamisu Rogo, thank you very much there. You joined us from the Niger State capital. Let's come back to our studios, Dr. Kabir Adamu. Kabir, well, of course, you are our regular security analyst. Now, when we try to put together some of these occurrences and the impressions that emerge from the occurrences, whether Kankara, now Kagara, and then, of course, the sporadic incidents of abduction and ransom taking, as well as protection racketeering. We understand that in some of the places, you have to pay to go to your farm. You also have to pay to harvest your crops. I was just wondering, if these are roving gangs of bandits and they appear to be in different locations, taking out their own territories, as it were, can we therefore also now begin to think ahead and look ahead and say, look, earlier you were talking about the fact that they have arms, and then those arms will be useless without ammunition. Now, we saw the abductors of the bus passengers in the videos that circulated online, where they were bragging. I mean, you had them with their chain of bullets, and I think with also a rocket launcher. Is there a risk, and one that we should therefore worry about, that these persons we are referring to now as bandits just might become militias?
Yes, that risk remains. And in fact, in certain quarters, I've heard them referred to as ethnic militias. The origin of this is the inter-community clashes that occurred in places like Jos, Taraba, And so the theory emerged that some of the players invited armed militias to protect them, and not only protect them, to project their interest. So that theory is out there. But I would also say that as a professional who studies this development, we're dealing with 3 issues. And it's absolutely important that the government takes them as such. So the farmer-herder conflict that we've discussed extensively and that I know as your station has covered. Then banditry. Banditry is pure banditry. A group of persons who, for whatever reason, have decided to operate outside the law. And they are projecting themselves using means that are against the law of that particular country or location. And then the last one is kidnap for ransom. Now these are 3 separate issues. And even though sometimes you can have one player doing the 2 or even 3 together, but they are different in context. So as an example, farmer-herder conflict is socio-economic. We understand that these are 2 different groups trying to project their economic interest, sometimes unfortunately using means that are not legal. When, for instance, they engage in armed conflict, both sides. The second one is pure criminality and must be dealt with as that criminality, that is banditry. And so that brings me to your question. When bandits engage in the kind of activities they engage in, and unfortunately in our context, we're successful, now it leads to a progression. And that progression can go to any extent, including terrorism. And that is why sometimes we see a linkage between them and terrorists. They are operating in the same space. The supply chain of the weapons that we talked about earlier on, the same supply chain that they are exploiting, because they are using the same weapons. And then lastly, they are also more or less using funds from the same source. There is nothing at this stage stopping me to believe that the Northeast terrorists are not partnering with the bandits to generate funds for their activities. Because when you kidnap, funds are paid as ransom. And so that funds can be used to provide or source or fund any activity that you want to do, including the objectives of Boko Haram. So, and then the third one, kidnap for ransom. Like I said, it can be the same player doing the same thing. But I worry when I hear the approach by especially government lumping all of these 3 together. We need to separate them, and we need to put forward solutions for each one of them if we're going to stop the progression
but how can that take place? You know, for instance, if you're in a position to advise the government on a better approach to tackle this menace, what should be your template? Of course, we've described them as 3 different formations of criminality. Right now, how would the military face it? I had this question because when we heard about the plane crash yesterday, we were told that their mission was in Niger State. I was asking myself, what were they supposed to do with an aircraft? Is there not a surveillance? What information could they have gotten by using an aircraft flying over Niger State?
That aircraft is a specialized aircraft for surveillance purposes, and it's an intelligence capability where you use a lot of resources, technical resources, to look at the geopolitical location where you are surveilling. Movement, for instance, like we talked about, motorbikes would generate dust, and you'll be able to see it from that extent. You can also take pictures, then compare those pictures and see differences from one position to other. If it has infrared capabilities, it can also detect the kind of. So yes, it's absolutely important, but it's just one element within several other elements that you put together as intelligence. Fusion purposes. Kindly remind me of your
in terms
question?
of what government should do to tackle the menace.
Now, government has done a lot, and I would really commend the Buhari administration, especially in the area of farmer-herder conflict. Several solutions have been put forward. The livestock transformation policy that was introduced, but that became controversial, and I think at the point, because of the controversy, there was a bit of relaxation. But that issue, especially the ranching component of that issue, would solve that issue, or at least reduce it tremendously, the farmer-herder conflict.
And incidentally, Niger State has shown an example of what to do by taking relevant aspects of the livestock transformation plan and then domesticating it. But as we said, unfortunately, the kidnap incidents have now overshadowed that. But there will always be an opportunity to return to normalcy, and therefore they can address that. Kieran, we are pressed for time with Kabiru.
Let me quickly mention the approach to the other two issues. Both of them involve weaponization. So we need to, as a matter of urgency, either introduce the small the gun proliferation commission that would help mop up the weapons in circulation. Then drug addiction. Every time they do these things, they are usually under drug influence. So it's absolutely important that we discuss that. And then lastly, I would, from the political front, I would recommend government strongly for the president to convene the National Security Council, where an expanded one, where he will bring in the governors and the leadership of the National Assembly. The objective of that is so that government can come out with a single statement regarding these issues. Currently, we're seeing a lot of diverse opinions, especially from the governors.
And recall that just last week, Kingsley, at the National Assembly, the former Chief of Army Staff said that it will take 20 years, for us to, deal with Boko Haram. And as you rightly pointed out, Boko Haram may have links with all these elements, because they operate the same down in the bush. They have the same channel of supply chain. They use the same kind of weapons and all of that. So they need they have something in common.
Yeah, but I don't want Nigerians to be, feel bad about all of that. He said that, but he also gave the solution. He said military approach alone will not end the insurgency, and that was what he was trying to refer to. So governance is absolutely important in disrupting the progression of terrorism and banditry.
Okay, Dr. Kabiru Adamu would like to thank you. I'm sure you have take this as your subject matter to chew on, so that when next we invite you, probably we'll have the opportunity of talking about it. There is a committee on illicit small arms and light weapons. Was that committee necessarily incapacitated, that it needed a transmutation into a commission before it could become effective? I don't want a response from you now. Dr. Kabiru Adamu, thanks a lot for being around this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, it's Good Morning Nigeria. We're taking a short break now. When we return, we'll be discussing how Nigeria exited the recession at the end of quarter 4, 2020, and matters arising therefrom. You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on NTA's network service. As a prompt for our conversation, that's the next one on Nigeria exiting the last recession. Let's listen to this background report by Abdul Salam Jibril.
It is official. Nigeria has exited her second recession. Experts maintain that Nigeria's economy unexpectedly came out of a recession in the fourth quarter as growth in agriculture and telecommunications offset a sharp drop in oil production. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, gross domestic product grew 0.11% in the 3 months through December from a year earlier, compared with a decline of 3.6% in the third quarter. While data from the International Monetary Fund shows that Nigeria returned to this slight positive move after 2 quarters negative growth to contraction. Recall that in November last year, the country's economy slumped into a second recession after the country's GDP contracted by minus 3.62% in the third quarter of 2020 after contracting by minus 6.1%. A major reason for the recession was attributed to the devastating impact of the coronavirus pandemic, in which many other countries around the world suffered COVID-19-induced recession. Experts say the surprise rebound means Africa's largest economy may recover faster than expected as the oil price and output increase this year. It could also point to the growing importance of the non-crude sector. Following Nigeria's exit of her second recession, what measures should be adopted to maintain the current tempo? The non-oil sector was identified as a contributory factor for the current fate. How can government support this sector towards achieving further economic growth and doing away with the dependence on oil? Guests on the program will speak to these and more shortly.
And joining us here in the studio to discuss the topic is Uche Waleke, Professor of Capital Market and former Commissioner of Finance, Imo State. It's good to have you this morning, sir.
Thank you, Kiran. Good morning, Nigeria.
And also with us in the studio is Yushua Aliyu. Yushua Aliyu is the financial analyst. Many thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Nigeria.
And we also have our regular guest here, Nii Akinsiju, an investment and financial analyst, is also here for this purpose. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure as always.
All right, gentlemen, delight to have you this morning. Let's plunge straight into the heart of the conversation. Nii Akinsiju, the recession that Nigeria slipped into in 2020 was obviously caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Is it necessarily the case that government's own structured approach to the economic aspects of the coronavirus by way of the economic sustainability plan could have been one of the reasons why we now have exited the recession earlier than anticipated?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's one. In fact, it's a major contributor to exiting the recession. One, we should look at the nature of that recession. It's based on two pillars in my consideration. The pillar of a lockdown that limited transactions, quantity of transactions that I put it, and of course, as a result of that, the constraints of cash flow. So the major redress measure would be when the lockdown is lifted and is managed, the segments of the economy that had been shut out will start opening up. And of course, to create momentum, government will need to inject funds, into the economy, as it were. And I think that's what government had done now for us to get to this level. You had a lockdown, but properly managed by a presidential task force on the COVID-19 pandemic, such that in a way you have a controlled opening up of the economy, as it were. And pari passu with that was also the injection of funding, especially to the critical areas of the economy. The manufacturing sector through the targeted facility of the CBN, the SMEs loans also through the CBN. You also have the cash transfer, the salary support, the payroll support program, artisanal support grants, and all manners of grants. So that within that 6-9 months period, more than 2 trillion had been injected into the economy. Of course, that would invigorate economic activities, transactional values and quantity, the quantum of transactions. So to a large extent, we have seen that, and we have seen that in reflections of even the major driver of our economy, agriculture. Agriculture beats all predictions, to bounce near 100 basis points from 1.4% in the Q3 to 3.4. That's very impressive, and I hope that going forward that will also start reflecting on food inflation, And yes, ICT had come to stay, and I think Nigeria will not be the same again with ICT. It's impressive, and of course that is where to go, returning close more than 15%, as its contribution. It was carnage for oil and gas, It did not just beat the quarter on quarter, it also beat the year on year. If we are dependent as we used to on the oil and gas sector, we would have been in a critical situation by now, because it moved down from 13.89 in Q3 to 19.7. That's a major decline, you know. It's I think what it does is to tell Nigerians that the economy is being diversified, you know, more or less in terms of quantum of quantity than value, really. If we start now putting value, you know, to those segments of the economy that are in the non-oil sector, it means we have potentials not to drive higher than the figures we have now. Principally talking about opening up the economy, Q2, 13 activities or items on the GDP items of the 46 items, 13 were active. So we can see that progression. By Q3, 17 were active, you know, and of course by Q4, 27 items were active. So natural logic is that the economic were being deliberately opened up and energized.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Professor Owaleke. Now, given the growth rate of 0.11% in the Q4 of 2020, can we say that Nigeria is truly out of recession, or do you have any other way to describe it?
Well, $1 million question. I know I got a lot of calls from, especially journalists asking me, I should confirm to them, is the country really out of recession? You know, growing at 0.11%. And I said, technically, yes. If you define recession as, you know, 2 consecutive quarters of negative contraction in output, successively, then anytime you have a positive number, that means you have exited recession, you know, in technical, balance. It might be all numbers, really, but for me, what is important to me is the information content. The information content of that figure. IMF had predicted that the country would decline, will contract by 4.2% for 2020. But what we have had for the whole of 2020, you know, is 1.92%. Okay, the same IMF is projecting that this year the economy will grow by 1.5%. Fitch is projecting 1.7%. So from every indication, there's every likelihood that given what has happened, IMF, rating agencies, investment banks are likely to revise their estimates, you know, a lot more favorably. And as I said, it is the information content, the positive message that has sent to the international community, because that also has a way of influencing investments, you know, into the country whenever there is positive news, you know, out there. Having said that, I must also commend the NBS, National Bureau of Statistics, for releasing these numbers, you know, timely. Because if you go to the websites of some other countries, you wouldn't see the, you know, GDP numbers for the Q4, you know, already out. This is, you know, February. So whether in terms of CPI, Consumer Price Index, GDP, and some others, they have been coming out timely, you know, in the case of Nigeria. The attention now, you know, will now turn to the unemployment figures, because we want to know whether this 0.11 growth is also actually reflected in the unemployment figure. The unemployment figure, the latest we have is Q3 of 2020, you know, speaking of 27% unemployment rate and 28% underemployment rate. So we would want to know whether the growth rate in GDP, in real GDP year on year, okay, as I said, had impact on jobs, okay, or whether it was a jobless growth, because that is very critical. I must also say that there are a number of lessons one can draw from what has happened. The first is the point, you know, he has mentioned, and that's the point that the country can actually survive, you know, without oil, the way we are going. The non-oil sector was actually the game changer, growing by 1.699%, you know, in Q4 of 2020. The oil sector fell, contracted by as much as 19.7%, and yet we still had this, you know, this growth. So that tells you that the non-oil sector, which contributed over 94% to GDP, okay, remains for Nigeria, you know, has a lot of potentials. Okay. The second thing to note is that the oil sector performance is also a function of crude oil output, and not just crude oil price. If you noticed, the fourth quarter of 2020, crude oil price was relatively strong. Fourth quarter of 2020, and yet we had this dismal performance in the oil sector. What caused it? Look at the crude oil output. In January, first quarter of 2020, we were able to do over 2 million barrels per day. That fell to 1.8 million barrels per day in the second quarter. In the third quarter, we had 1.67 million barrels per day. And in the fourth quarter, we had 1.56 million barrels per day. So you can see the decline in crude oil production. So it's important we also look into that aspect and be sure that despite the OPEC cut, that the drop is not being caused by vandalism, it's not being caused by shutdowns, because that's also very important. And finally, let me also say in terms of lessons that agriculture is remains a very critical sector in this economy. Just as he pointed out, moving from 1.39 in Q3 to 3.47 in Q4. That's quite remarkable, and it's not unconnected with interventions, by the government, especially that of the Central Bank of Nigeria in the area of agriculture. There's no doubt that those interventions must have contributed to the performance that we recorded in agriculture.
All right, Professor Ochewaleke, thank you very much. Yushal Aliyu, let's have your own take on what it means that Nigeria has very rapidly exited the recession of 2020.
In economics, it is really to say that we are recovering. When you mention recovery, it's a situation where there is consistent within 2 quarters of decline, that's contraction. But when you have a positive growth, that means you are recovering. That recovery, if you remember vividly, in 2017, second quarter, when you came out from the previous recession, it was a fragile recovery. So to me, the same applies to this fragile recovery in the sense that there is a lot of indicators, economic indicators that can project the economy. One, the output of agriculture, which is being categorized to have contributed to about 3.47% to the GDP. But when you take the real GDP growth, that is, you put inflation into it, you now realize that there is more challenge, there is additional challenge to monetary and fiscal policies in an attempt to stabilize the economy and also to make price more relative to the economy.
All right, let's return to against you once more. How sustainable is this growth, considering the seemingly very slight growth rate compared to negative growth of 6.6% and 3.60% in the preceding quarters? Can this be sustained?
Yeah, I think the curve is showing sustainability, really, because you see from the first quarter of decline at 6.10, there was really a contraction, but the contraction is interpreted in growth, from 6.10 to 3.62, so it's not a decline after a decline, So some of us, by the Q2 figures, we're actually saying we're exiting recession already, So you can also see that the decline peaked, what you call a V, as it were, and then started moving up to this 0.110 we are talking about. Yeah, when we look at the year-on-year, as in the 12 months movement, the 1.92 will suggest that we are still in negative territory, But again, the movement of critical sectors of the economy would also tell us that we are in the upward trajectory. So if you have a Greek moving upward, which constitutes 26% of the GDP, you have ICT also moving up, which have been consistent. And more instructively, you have risk sector, which have been near perennial states of contraction over the last 6 quarters, also moving up. You have segments in the service sector, which constitutes more than 50% of the total GDP. You have, for the first time, insurance moving up. We have health and social sectors also moving up. Now, to me, when we have all those segments, though their contribution to the larger percentage, of the economy is not so big, but these are new entrants into the upward movement, of the GDP. So to me, what we need to do is to continue to energize these sectors. As it were, we can see the three other sectors that are actually the burden on the economy have direct relationship with the shutdown of the economy: transportation, education, and of course accommodation and leisure. I know for certain that the more activities are being opened up, these segments will also start, of course, moving up. You have education, schools are opening up now. Universities are opening up. Secondary schools are opening up. Primary schools are opening up. So the impact would be felt in Q1 2021. Transportation, the aviation sector is growing strong. We are moving now across states. The prayer is that we don't have a serious second wave that we will need to also shut down. If we are not shutting down, those activities will also reflect in Q1 2021. So for me, I think the activities, of course, will be in the upward trajectory, and it will be sustainable.
All right. Thank you, Niyi. Professor Uche Waleke, let's use the figures out of Q4 2020 to begin to discuss our aspiration for 2021, because the 2021 budget has its own numbers to say, well, we expect the economy to grow by so much, but what we saw in the last quarter of 2020 is 0.11%. Are we likely to ramp up growth in order to meet our aspiration for 2021, and more importantly, let our growth outstrip our population rate,
very key,
so that prosperity can now become more evident?
Very, very key. You've hit the nail on the head. The GDP growth rate figure for 2021, according to the 2021 budget, is 3%. The government actually projects that the economy will grow by 3%. You've made the point that it's important that the growth rate exceeds population rate, because until that happens, the impact will not likely to be felt, and that's why you find people argue, people doubt. We say the economy is growing, but we can't feel the impact. It's partly because the growth rate has been weak. And if you take your mind back, since 2015, this economy has never witnessed any growth rate that is up to 3%. The highest we have had so far since 2015 was in 2015 itself, when the economy grew by 2.7%. That has been the highest. The next was in 2019, when the economy grew by 2.2%. In 2019, just last year, 2020, we have not been told that the economy grew by 1.92%. And interestingly, if you look at the growth that we had last year, 2020, 1.92% minus, it kind of cancels out the positive growth we had in 2018. In 2018, the growth rate was the same 1.92 positive. 2020 minus 1.92, so that cancels itself. And of course, you also know that in 2016, the economy was in a recession. The economy, grew by minus 1.6%. So in all of that, you discover that growth rate since 2015 has been tepid, hasn't been strong, and that's largely on account of oil price, performance. And in that kind of scenario, you won't expect to see the real impact on the economy, impact on jobs, in particular. And that's why I talked about that the attention now should be on the growth that will also be the type that creates jobs, because that is what is important. But growth itself is also important. It's important we have increase in GDP, because as we say, the GDP is a necessary condition for economic development, even though it's not a sufficient condition, but it's necessary. We need to have that growth. Otherwise, we can't be talking about reduction in poverty and increase in jobs. So how do we sustain it? It is by targeting the employment elastic sectors of the economy and putting more attention in these areas. As I said earlier on, agriculture actually didn't disappoint in the last quarter of 2021, and that's because of the interventions. So we need to intervene more in the agri value chain, because agriculture accounts for about 60% of the employment that we have in the country. The other sectors like real estate also was positive in Q4, 2.8% real estate. Construction too, still in a positive territory, but I also noted that construction actually fell compared to quarter 3 of 2020. It actually, quarter 3 was over 2%. In quarter 4, it actually fell to 1.something%. So we need to focus attention. ICT, that contributes 15% to GDP, is also another important area. Agriculture, as you had, 24% to GDP. So the focus should be on the real sector, the productive sectors of the economy. Manufacturing sector is still in negative territory, but it's also important to mention that it has moderated. The drop has moderated compared to what it was in Q2. Of course, partly on account of COVID. So I will suggest going forward that we should focus more attention in these areas. And the good thing is that the budget came out in good time. Implementation, I understand, has commenced. And if it can be sustained, if it can, the economic sustainability plan can be, pursued aggressively, particularly the real sector component of that plan. If you look at the plan that it has, for agriculture, for putting in place the enabling environment, especially power. It talks about provision of, solar energy. It talks about provision of mass housing. These are critical areas that will actually, jumpstart this economy. And as I said, what is important is ensuring that implementation is, carried out so that the results at the end of the day can manifest again in the GDP figure. So I think it's something that can be sustained. And I also think the target of 3% might be ambitious, a little ambitious, but that of the central bank, 2%. Central bank has 2% target for 2021. I think it's a little more realistic. And talking about the central bank, it was central bank that first predicted that the economy was going to be out of recession by the fourth quarter of 2020. It was the CBN governor that said it at the first, and then people said, my finance minister talked about first quarter of 2021. And I remember I was one of those that shared in that optimism that the economy was going to have a V-shaped recession.
All right. Thank you. Let's bring in Yusra once more. There are concerns, from industry watchers about the purchasing power of the people in the midst of inflammatory or rather inflationary worries and pressures. And the people are skeptical that this staggering out of recession may not be enough, because if people are not feeling the impact of it, then it may just be on paper.
Anytime we are speaking about collective prosperity, it has to do with the income that people use to have their purchasing power in the market. And I think one important aspect, we have to look at unemployment aspect of our economy and do much intervention to that. What I mean here is the fact that over the years, inflation has been dealing with consumers significantly with their purchasing powers. All their purchasing power is being eroded as a result of certain loopholes in the monetary policy, especially the banking. You realize that we have enough microfinance banks that can assist the small businesses in the economy, which can sustain their function in the market and at the same time create additional jobs. So that aspect is very serious. The second aspect is when you look at the purchasing power of those who are even who are employed in the economy. Take, for instance, the 30,000 minimum wage, which has been pegged as the basis at which income should be allocated to different workers in the economy. You realize that the percentage increase in inflation from 11.9% to about 15.6% is very significant. So there is need for government, especially the Federal Ministry of Finance, to carefully look at certain ease of doing business that will facilitate a lot of investors to invest, and at the same time to create opportunity for many micro, small businesses to have access to funding so that they can have more people employed, and thereby having a lot of income so that their purchasing power can be maintained over a time.
All right, thank you very much, Yushua. Well, let's also now hear the views of our viewers who have sent in their tweets. We'll take them and then return to the guests to get their additional thoughts as well as closing comments. Muntana Farouk, the economic parameters that led Nigeria into a recession are still present in the economy. The cost of doing business in the country is high. Many MSMEs are struggling to raise their heads above water as a result of the hike in the price of PMS, that's petrol, VAT, value-added tax, and electricity tariff.
Francis Obi says, we're happy to hear that we have gone out of recession. I will still insist that the electricity generation and distribution be improved so that companies come into production and employment to reduce our dependence on importation.
Amobola Humbabs, now sustaining the recent exit from recession is a function of consolidating on 4 major economic stimuli the federal government implemented under the leadership of the Vice President, who in June 2020, directed by the President, to come up with the ESP, that's the Economic Sustainability Plan, in order to deal with the post-COVID-19 pandemic.
All right. Festus Akimbo, he says it is great that Nigeria has fought back from the deepest recession in recent years with growth in the price of oil and ICT. Government at all levels must continue to enforce COVID-19 protocols to avoid tougher restrictions that can restrict business and social life.
Oladimeji Morufu, dependence on oil must be avoided. Now that the borders are reopened, they will need close monitoring in order to generate funds. Exportation of local goods must also be encouraged.
Leo Fadaka, to sustain the exit from the recent second recession, the ICT, MSME, and mechanized agricultural sectors must be intensified. Attention must also be paid to the creative industry, which currently engages majority of the youths.
Chris Simeon, it's good news we have exited recession, but to sustain the tempo, government should continue to give priority attention to MSMEs. By so doing, our economy would be stronger.
Taufik Olaleko, the ICT that contributed more to exit from the recession should be subsidized and mechanized. And mechanized farming should also be intensified.
All right, so those are the views that we'll take very quickly from your tweets. Let's come back to our guest, Neya Kinsiju. Well, all three of you, and that's what the numbers say, have spoken highly of the contribution of agriculture to our GDP. Incidentally, when we had the recession 5 years ago, in 2016, there were at least 2 sectors that continually recorded positive growth. Agric was one of them, and then the other was solid minerals. Now, in exiting the recession of 2020, little has been said about the solid mineral sector. Instead, agric remains a growth sector, and now ICT, of course, has also come in as a comparable sector of growth. I was just wondering, now, okay, what's happening to solid minerals? That's one. Secondly, the ICT growth that we are hailing, how much of local content is available therein? And could we ramp up local content and truly ensure that we have exponential growth from that subsector?
Yeah, okay. Looking at the solid mineral sector, it's still actually in a recession, as it were, and it's a high recession. Really, it's more than 20% negative, and to that extent, it tells us that not much activities is ongoing in that sector. One, then two, that again there are potentials actually, to tap from that sector. So it means there's a need for proper application of policies. I've not been seeing much policy deployment in that sector. The minister, the last I read, was that trying to properly manage the artisanal exploiters. Artisanal exploiters may not properly contribute to the larger economy in the solid mineral sector, as it were. You do not compare solid mineral approach. I mean, that artisanal smallholders approach that you have in the agri sector, which is natural one, needs lower capital injection, needs, of course, lower professional capability. In the solid mineral sector, you need professionalization. You need huge capital injection and proper engagement with global markets. So there's a need for a spectrum to be created in terms of value chain. I am not seeing that already. So what we have been doing since forever, more or less, is just throwing stones into a dark tunnel in the solid mineral sector. That is one sector waiting to be tapped, because not a huge study had been done about mapping our solid mineral deposits across the country. We have certain material to reference, but what it tells us is that every local government, not even state, every local government has one or two solid mineral to tap into. There's a need to properly exploit that. And talking ICT, Nigeria is becoming, either we like it or not, one of the bastions, of ICT in Africa, and the global investment entrepreneurs are also looking at Nigeria. In 2018, we were the first destination of investment for startups. In 2020, we are rated third after Kenya, Egypt. So what it means is that going forward, we have capacity, especially for internalizing, our capacities and our capabilities. We have very young population. I watched the cryptocurrency debate here. It shows how our youthful population are latched onto that. That is just one extension of the ICT industry. Yeah. We have so much, to tap into.
Now let's begin, Showaleka, perhaps on the same question, because this issue of solid minerals, we keep hearing gestation period, for the past 2 or 3 decades. We keep hearing that you need a huge capital and all of that. And in the process, nothing has been done seriously to ensure that that sector makes its own contribution to the GDP. Now we're talking about the ICT, which is making a very reasonable contribution to the GDP presently. We still rely on international satellites. We still rely on imported softwares. So come in here.
Okay, well, from my experience when I was in FAC, that's the Federation Account Allocation Committee, the challenge we always had with respect to federation account was the contribution that the solid mineral sector, Ministry of Solid Minerals, was bringing. We always felt that it was very, very minute, and that has a lot to do with the fact that the sector is, largely informal, dominated by artisanal miners, okay, and illegal mining activities are also going on, and the control of the sector is at the federal level. So I think, my personal view, one of the ways going forward is to devolve the control of this solid minerals, devolve it to the states. If the states can have more control over the solid minerals within their domain, okay, the states will be in a better position to attract investors in those areas, as opposed to the federal government asking the states to set up companies and then come and apply for license to do the mining. So if states have control over some of the solid minerals and then pay whatever, to the federation account, I think the contribution, from that sector will be certainly higher.
All right, thank you. The other leg of it, which is the ICT sector, how can we have more local content, the use of satellites, the use of other kinds of hardware and software? The software aspect, our young minds and brains are active, but what do we need to do so that we can have an exponential growth in that sector? You shall, very briefly.
I think there should be investment by the private sector, and in doing that, there is also need to look into the cyber crime. Most of the ICTs are associated with cyber crime, but the best way to do it is the institution, especially digital economy, that have started the program. I think there is need to take all this effort to various local government to hunch talent and then to assemble them, and then also to give them a proper orientation and the best way to practice in that. In line with what we are discussing about solid mineral, one important aspect about solid mineral which I want to shed small light in is insecurity. Despite the fact that the solid mineral has been contributing significantly for the past 2-3 years, insecurity now has been a challenge for the operators. You have many operators who are willing to invest, but because of insecurity, that insecurity is now taking them out of the business. So when you join the two together, the ICT and the solid mineral, there is possibility that it will give many jobs to our young talent people who are in different institutions of higher learning.
Right. All right. Thank you, Yeshua. We'll have to pause you there as we run out of time. Thank you indeed, gentlemen, for being part of our program this morning. Yeshua Ali, financial analyst, thank you indeed for coming. And Nii Akinsiju, an investment and financial analyst. We're also glad talking to you this morning.
Thanks so much.
All right. Professor Uche Uwaleke, professor of capital market. It's been wonderful sharing your thoughts this morning on our program. All right. Next is sports.